Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I have a bunch of news to share about Donald Trump, his most recent vile comments, new details about how he manipulated the investigation into Brett Kavanaugh, new stories about his betrayal of the American people, and new polling. So first, let's get his hate and racism out of the way.
How about allowing people to come through an open border, 13,000 of which were murderers? Many of them murdered far more than one person, and they're now happily living in the United States. You know, now a murderer, I believe this, it's in their genes, and we got a lot of bad genes in our country right now.
So that was Trump speaking with Hugh Hewitt. And again, as I say, if it walks like Hitler and talks like Hitler, it's probably a fascist like Hitler. I hope people wake up before it's too late. You know, I know some people question when I say this, but I honestly used to be a swing voter. And the reason was I didn't really pay attention to politics. Like so many other people, didn't do my own research. You know, back then I was too busy raising a family, never really thought about how either of the party's platforms affected me directly or the country or the world. So I'm ashamed to say I voted based on vibes and who I liked. But I can say with absolute certainty, I will never again in my lifetime vote for a Republican because they have allowed this racist insanity to go completely unchecked. But for Republicans' weakness and their fealty to Trump, we would not be facing another potential 4 years of this wannabe Hitler in control of our country. I don't think I've ever hated someone as much as I hate Donald Jerkoff Trump. And it is primarily because he has given license to the bigots to spew their sick insanity and their insecurity in the form of racism. So anyway, it is pathetic. It's a sign of weakness, racism. I mean, and that's the type of people who are attracted to Trump's racism, pathetic and weak. So next up is news about what a sham Trump is as far as his quote unquote real estate empire goes. According to a new Forbes report, Trump's New York property at 40 Wall Street is well over encumbered. It is underwater. And he's not taking in enough money to cover the monthly payment. So Forbes says that Trump currently owes $118 million on that property, but it's worth $116 million. So if he was to sell the property, he would have to pay the difference. He would come out of pocket to close escrow. Plus, he'd have to cover closing costs, real estate fees, so sales fees. And you might think, well, why would he sell it then? He can just hold on to it. Well, evidently, Trump doesn't own the land. He owns the building, but it sits on leased land. And that lease is going to quadruple. The amount is going to quadruple in the next 9 years. And Trump must have agreed to a balloon payment on this property, which means that, you pay a certain amount and then at a certain date, you have to pay the entire balance. Because Forbes says the $118 million balance is due in July of next year. And given that it's no longer worth what it was when he initially took out the loan, he's not going to be able to refinance that property. So at least not for the same amount. Again, he would have to come in with cash because they want to see some equity in there, especially with a large commercial property like that. I mean, they want to see 40% equity. Maybe with him and, who he is being the former president, they might go 30%, but, they're not going to give you a loan when the property is upside down in value. And lenders are also going to have a problem with the fact that the building's rental income has dropped by almost half. In 2018, they said it was bringing in about 21 million. As of last year, that fell to 12.8 million. And again, that's not enough to cover the current monthly payment. So again, not something that lenders like to see, right? They don't want to see you having to come out of pocket every month to cover the payment. They also said, which we all pretty much know, Trump has about $413 million in cash on hand. but his current legal liabilities are more than that. They're 566 million. So, you know, what is he going to do? You know, lenders don't like to see that either. So he's going to have to sell the only thing that he really has of value that isn't upside down, which is his failing social media company shares. He has to sell those as soon as possible. So we'll see what happens. I also have news about the fake investigation into the Supreme Court candidate, or then Supreme Court candidate Brett Kavanaugh. He is now a sitting member of the Supreme Court. As I'm sure you guys remember, Kavanaugh was accused of sexual assault and sexual harassment. This was, accusations from his time in high school and college. His response was, well, I like beer, right? Essentially. And then he cried, he threw a tantrum, because they're the party of masculinity. So not that I think it's, not masculine to cry, but when you're crying in that setting and over that, over the fact that you're being credibly accused by multiple women, I mean, grow up. So Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has been investigating the investigation, and he found that Trump lied about giving the FBI free rein to review all avenues of the investigation against Kavanaugh. I know you guys are all shocked. So Whitehouse issued a report, it came out today, but to sum it up, it was basically a sham. Trump made public statements. He said things like, I want them to interview whoever they deem appropriate, right? It's up to their discretion. Behind the scenes, though, he quashed this investigation. According to Senator Whitehouse, the FBI was given only a week and they were to conduct very cursory investigation. And when they reached out to Trump to get authorization to expand their probe, they never got a response. So apparently, the White House instructed the FBI to interview only 10 potential witnesses, but they weren't allowed to search for any corroborating evidence. So you can ask these witnesses whatever you want, but you can't corroborate what they're saying. And then the FBI confirmed how this process works in these situations. They issued a statement saying, quote, the FBI follows a long-standing established process through which the scope of the investigation is limited to what is requested. The FBI does not have the independent authority to expand the scope of a supplemental background investigation outside the requesting agency's parameters. So in other words, whoever asked for this investigation has to tell them what they can and can't do, how far it can go, how wide it can reach. They are not allowed to do anything more than what that agency tells them. Whoever it was that asked for this investigation, they set the parameters, that's it. And then White House confirmed there were more than 4,500 tips about Kavanaugh that had been submitted to the FBI tip line. But he said, quote, it all went up to the White House for a decent burial with no investigation whatsoever. So yeah, giving power to someone like Trump is extraordinarily dangerous. Next is news that in 2020, Trump secretly sent COVID tests to Vladimir Putin when we in the US were desperately in need of those test kits. So much for America first, huh? Right? When it comes to Trump, it's always been Russia first. Anyway, the people who say, oh, the Russia hoax, Russia, oh, give me a freaking break, right? There is so much smoke, we're choking on it over here. We know there's a fire, okay? It's that simple. Trump was also recently outed by some of the people in his administration for withholding aid to California during the 2018 wildfire for political purposes. So check this out.
Disaster relief should never be politicized. It is a very regulated process. Like there's a process for the disaster declarations that happens. I can tell you very clearly that there were several times where there were disaster relief declarations stuck on Donald Trump's desk. In the case of the California wildfires, this was fairly shocking because the way that was able to be pushed out, we were able to get it out to California residents. And I say that with such disbelief because it enrages me that this was ever part of the thought process, was that he was told that a certain county, the majority of the voters there voted for him. And that should be disturbing to every American.
Yeah.
So that was Olivia Troy. She was on the Bulwark podcast with Tim Miller recently. And Troy was the Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to Vice President Mike Pence. So she dealt with all of the disasters, all the man-made disasters, shootings, natural disasters during the Trump administration. And she said the California incident that you heard there was just one of many instances in which Trump withheld aid to a quote unquote blue state. And Troy's right. This should concern every American that we had a so-called man in the Oval Office who played politics with people's lives. Imagine how MAGA heads would explode if this story came out about Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. If they withheld aid to red states, this would be on Fear News Network 24/7. I mean, they're out there right now pushing BS stories about how the government is handling everything that's going on in North Carolina and Florida and elsewhere. I mean, it's all complete BS, like I said. I mean, they're flat out lying. The federal government is doing what they're supposed to do. Every governor has said so. Most of them red state governors, Republican governors, they've all said, no, we're getting all the aid we need. But they're out there pushing this propaganda because, Trump did it. So they figure, oh, well, every president must do this. Every president must play politics with people's lives, right? And, by the way, I want to point out, whenever there's fires in California or an earthquake or, we haven't had a big earthquake since the 90s, but, whenever there's some sort of disaster, natural disaster, typically from climate change, in a blue state, what do we hear from people on the right? You see people on Twitter, oh, well, maybe it's because of their horrible policies. Maybe it's because they're baby killers. Maybe it's because of this. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's Maybelline. I mean, they just come up with these wild things like, we in blue states were being punished because of the way we behave. Wow. Maybe we on the left need to question then. Why are they getting all of these hurricanes and tornadoes and flooding and all these natural disasters that keep hitting these red states? Maybe it's because of their horrific policies. Maybe it's because of the things that they do that God doesn't like. Just saying. And to get back to what Olivia Troy was saying, she is not the only one. So she is not the only Trump administration official who has said this. A man named Mark Harvey was the senior director for resilience policy on the National Security Council. This was in the Trump administration. He corroborated Troy's version of events. So, maybe some of this is breaking through because the most recent New York Times Siena poll, it shows Harris with a 3% national lead over Trump. So that's within the margin of error, but it's a shift from earlier in September because the same poll had Harris and Trump tied, and that was right after the debate. So the debate did not move it, but now it's starting to move. Another poll that was conducted by TIPP Insights, their poll shows identical results. So 49% of respondents said they like Harris, 46% prefer Trump. But, and this is a big but, Simone, go watch Pee-wee's Big Adventure. You'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, independent voters, according to this poll, favor Harris by 16%. Independents are a really crucial voting bloc, and 52% told the pollsters that they would vote for Harris, compared to only 36% who said, no, I'm voting for Trump. So this is exciting news because this same poll in October of 2020 showed Joe Biden with an only 9-point lead among independents. So Harris is doing even better with these independent voters. A Reuters Ipsos poll also shows that Harris has a 3-point national lead, and a brand new Morning Consult poll has Harris up by 6 points, 51 to 46. This poll is significant because they surveyed more than 11,000 voters nationwide. Most of these polls include maybe around 1,200 people, so this one was much larger. And the margin of error for the morning consult poll is plus or minus 1 point, so well outside of that. And I should say too, the New York Times Siena poll, that one is very consequential because Nate Cohn, I think, is the one who does that. And he has been showing, and I've mentioned this before, that we might have more alignment now between the popular vote and the electoral college vote. You know, as we all know, you know, it's been an ongoing thing where you say, okay, well, you know, the Democrat has to be ahead by 5 or 6 points nationally in order to overcome the natural advantage that Republicans have in the Electoral College, because they have what I call the participation trophy, which is the Electoral College. That's the only way that they ever win, right? They get their little participation trophy. So what Cohn is saying is that it might be shifting. We might be seeing these two things align more, because what's happening is, you know, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, yes, we're seeing them very close in national polls, typically 1%, 2%, maybe 3%, like we've seen in this one. But what he's saying is, and he's said this multiple times now, we're seeing Donald Trump run up the score in states that won't matter. So on a national level, when you're doing a national poll, you're seeing, yes, they're very close, but it's because Donald Trump is running up his numbers in states like California or New York or Florida even. I mean, Florida is going to go for Trump. It's a red state now, right? So he can't win twice in that state. I mean, you only get the number of electoral college votes available for that state. So it doesn't matter if he wins by 5%, if he wins by 20%, if he wins 90% of the vote, he still only gets the same amount of electoral college votes. Same thing with New York and California, right? They're blue states. They're not going to go for Donald Trump. So even though he's running up his numbers and doing better in those states than he has in previous election cycles, which is insane to me, but that's where we're at, mostly because of young voters who don't remember his insanity. But anyway, he's not going to win those states. So, you know, whether he is getting 30% of the vote or 35% of the vote, he's not going to win. So it doesn't matter. So it's showing that nationally, yes, the race is tight, but when it comes to, you know, what's going to happen in the election with the electoral college votes, really what is important are those swing states that we need to be watching out for. And so I have some polling on that, on swing states, but I'll share that in another video. So this one isn't like an hour long. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching and listening. Please like, please share, and subscribe. Please donate if you can. Love you all. Take care. Talk with you soon.